Cool to meet you guys in person. And I know in that meeting we sort of threw a lot together and it was complex, but I promise we're going to structure it and make it simple and focus primarily on your experience and making this class as good online as it would be in person. So we heard that almost everyone has access to Photoshop and can download it. So my expectation is that you've downloaded and installed Photoshop. So let's do a quick project to get you oriented to Photoshop. The first thing that we're going to do, and so what we're going to do with this project is make something like a header for the Unwritten Blue website, and this would be an image that you create as a header for a blog post or something like that. Now, one of the most important things about digital art is having resources. So this is, I think, my favorite website for free, copyright free, public to the internet, high quality images that you can use when you're building website sliders, and it's called unsplash.com. So what you'll do is go to Unsplash and just take some time to do some searching for 3 images, or three or four, and think about the. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and I have a couple of things open. I have two of my Unsplash images open. This is a beautiful lightning bolt. And then I have my tree that I got, and that's all I got for now. But I would encourage you to, get whatever you want to work with from Unsplash, because you don't necessarily have to get the photos that I like, because there'll be tons of trees and lightning bolts. The other thing that I have here is this is the PNG that is attached to this assignment, so you can download it and you will have this exact same thing. Now, before we start, we're going to get oriented to Photoshop. So in Photoshop, one of the first thing that we should do is learn to navigate, right? So, but before we talk about that process, we should talk about the complexity of Photoshop, right? So see how I have view here. So I view and I can zoom in like that. I can zoom out like that. I can fit on screen 100%, right? So this menu allows me to zoom and navigate, right? I can open a window, the navigator window, and this menu and this navigator window is pretty much just the same thing in a different format, right? So I adjust the slider. I can use this, right? Cool. So we have a menu item, window item, and then over here you'll notice that there's a tool, the zoom tool. We can zoom in, and if you hold Option on a zoom tool, you can zoom out. Now, critical to all of this stuff, there's another tool over here called the grabby hand, and that lets you scroll around and examine this stuff in detail, right? The key command for the grabby hand is the spacebar. And that brings me to my next point, is that we just did a view sequence through the menu, and then we did another view sequence through the navigator panel. Then we did another view sequence through the toolbar, and finally the most efficient and the best view sequence is just by using the keyboard. So that is Command plus, Command minus, and when you're zoomed up and you want to do intense pixel work, you can hold the space bar and use the grabby hand. So so what I find in Photoshop in this sequence, for instance, is that there are 4 layers of redundancy for zooming, and there are 4 layers of redundancy for almost everything, right? So the thing about Photoshop is not learning everything. It's just kind of like weeding stuff out that is annoying or that doesn't work for you. For me, this is, this palette is kind of good. The view window, I do open it occasionally. I use it occasionally. When you're doing a lot of high-level process work and you're doing the same thing over and over, you want the fastest move you can possibly make, which is on the keyboard, and it's Command plus and minus. So if you remember that sequence, that's kind of an essential sequence. Command plus, Command minus, and then the grabby hand allows you to move around. And then the only other thing I would add to that is Command 0, which centers you back in place. So as we work on this project, we're going to discuss some of the essential sequences and things that you should know when you're using Photoshop. And that's the first one, Command plus, Command minus, spacebar for the grabby hand. And that will take you a lot further than any of these other redundant ways to use the zoom sequence. The view sequence, which is Command plus, Command minus, Command 0, spacebar for the grabby hand, we will add another essential sequence called the collage sequence. Now, Photoshop is designed for collage. It's the most important thing that it does when you're doing process work in Photoshop, or you have a job in Photoshop. You will mostly be doing collage. So, and as with the view sequence, it is quadruply redundant, right? So just like here in view, right? This we should think of everything that has to do with view. I kind of associate the collage sequence with edit, and you can see cut, copy, paste. That is the collage sequence. So you select something from one file, you go to the other file, or you select something from one file, you copy it, you go to the other file, and then you paste it. Then you transform it, you move it into place, then you press return to do the transform. So in terms of, you can do that in any number of ways. These are select tools, right? So you could take a rectangular marquee and select all of that, copy it, and then paste it somewhere else. And then you could do the copy here, copy, and then you could go to the other image and then do edit, paste. And then you would transform it. But with Photoshop, it really helps to simplify the complexity, to know that everything is redundant and find the easiest thing, the one that works for you. So the one that works for me is always going to be the fastest one, and that is key commands, right? So and in this case, it's key commands. Sometimes it's other things. Sometimes it's tools, but in this case, it is key commands. So all right, so let's go. So let's do the key commands. So to do the edit sequence as fast and most efficiently as possible, you remember the key commands. And the first one is for selection. So that is Command A. That means select all. And the opposite of Command A is Command D. Command D. So Command D is deselect. So Command A, and just like on a word processor, you have Command C, and then you go over to where you want to collage something, and then you hit Command V. Just like a word processor, that pastes it. Now, the next thing you do is move it around and transform it. Now, it seems intuitive that you might, want this to be easily scalable, but in Photoshop, it is definitely better to use a command for transform. That command is just Command T, and that lets you change the size of an image automatically and sort of place it. It also lets you rotate it and put it into place. So that is the end of my collage sequence. It was select, copy, paste, transform. Something I use in every step of what I do in Photoshop, right? Select, copy, paste, and transform. So now we're going to look at the central idea of Photoshop, which is here in the layers palette, right? Every time you paste something in, it comes in on another layer. And the key to Photoshop is management of the layer and making the layer interact with the other layers. So each layer is separate in its own way, but it can be interactive in this transparency menu up here, right? So you can see the text kind of interacting with the layers beneath it as though it were transparent. That is what Photoshop does. It's the central idea of Photoshop. And if you're ever working with your layers palette closed, you will make mistakes and you're not working correctly. The layers palette should always be up, and you really need to be seeing the layers palette every time to understand what's going on. So when I'm teaching this class in person and we're doing Photoshop, almost everyone who raises their hand and says like, "Oh, I'm having a problem with Photoshop. It's buggy. It's closing on me, or it's not behaving as expected." It's because I can almost, without even going over to look at what they're doing, I know that their layers palette is closed or that they don't understand the layers palette. So here's an example, right? Like so here's layer 1, that has the text. Layer 2, that has the image. And layer 3, that's just empty, but it's below the image. So a common thing is I'm working with this red color, right? And then we might have a painting assignment or something like that. And I expect that I can easily paint red as much as I want to, but I can't, right? Where is it? Oh, Photoshop isn't working right. The paintbrush isn't working right. But what it almost always is just that the layers are out of order. See, if the layers are out of order, then this red layer is actually below the trees, so you can't really see anything that you're doing. Photoshop has been so refined over the years, and the program, I've never really seen the program make an error or a mistake, especially if you have a longer computer, a newer computer. So if you are, any frustration you have, anything where you think like, this is not what it's supposed to do, I don't understand, whatever, I can guarantee you can solve that frustration by just opening the layers palette and looking at it. And what I did to change the view is just right clicked it and switched to large thumbnails, so I could see it. And sure enough, if I go here, like, oh, I can see I was working on that all the time. That is the key to success in Photoshop, is that layers palette. Okay, so and also this doesn't, it seems really simple when you're working with an image like this where it only has 2 layers, but oh my gosh, in some painting projects I've ended up with hundreds of layers in separate folders and keeping them organized. That is really the key to understanding Photoshop, is being able to navigate your layers, understanding what you did, and understanding that any problem that you might have is actually in the layers palette. Even if you don't believe it, even if you think you're doing everything right. 3/4 of the way there. Photoshop just makes collages. It looks super complex, but it's just a simple art tool. It does collages and painting, and that's about it. And you've already learned the collage sequence. You've learned the zoom sequence, and then finally you need to learn the undo and redo sequence. So the undo and redo sequence works like this. It's when you want to go when you made a mistake and you want to undo it. So the first way to access it is with the history palette. And the way that you do that is you go to Window, History. Cool. And you can see everything that you've done in the file. This only goes back 25 steps. So it's not something that I rely on because when you are going to use a lot more than 25 steps. I use thousands of steps if I'm working on a complex file. So if you really want to be safe, so I have an idea of maybe changing the color of this text, like maybe making it black, for instance. So if I'm really going to be safe, what I do is copy the text, right? So I can have a black version, or copy the layer, I mean. So I can have a black version or a white version, and I can switch between those while deciding. So the way that you copy a layer is you just take any active layer and you hit Command J. That'll give you duplicate of the layer, or you drag the layer into the new layer box, and that will give you duplicate of the layer 2, right? So instead of, try to not rely too much on undos because you run out of them. So I almost always duplicate the layer. But I also use undos all the time, and it's one of those things that you have to be really, really fast at. Right, so I don't think the history tool is the best for undos, but because we're exploring the redundancy, so that you understand that Photoshop is actually pretty simple, I'll go up and explore it in Edit. Right, so you can Edit will give you the exact same things. If you make a little dot on your drawing, for instance, you can do Edit and you can undo it. Edit, undo it. But this is one of those things that's so essential that you absolutely need the key commands, and the key command is exactly the same as in word processing. So just pay attention to my history palette here, and if I press Command Z a bunch of times, I'll go backwards all the way to the beginning of the document. And if I press Shift Command Z, I'll go forwards. And that's really kind of all that you need to know for undo and redo. But I want you to be able to, navigate the space. So know that just like me, you should always have your layers palette open, and know that the reason that Photoshop looks so complex is because there's always 3 or 4 ways to do anything. If you need a window like this open, then the logical place to go is Window. If you need to undo and redo, that's editing. So the logical place to go up here is editing. But really, the best thing to do is to know the key commands to undo and redo, as well as making copies when you really care about something.